Short answer, because before the advent of modern land transport like steam trains, ships were really the only viable option for long-haul bulk transport. Transport over land was infinitely more cumbersome and costly, as the only options available was animal back, cart, or carrying by humans. This all put a limit on land transport. It does not mean that there was no land transport, only that it fell within two categories. One would be short distance to the nearest river or seaport, or second, long distance land transport for goods that had enough value to support it. Within the last can be the movement of military units, which had high value in terms of securing territory. Within the Roman trade network, low-value bulk cargo in the form of daily stable foodstuffs was very common, however, and for this the only real option was sea transport. In terms of volume, this was the largest part of trade in the Roman Empire. Transport across water was not only by sea, but also on waterways in the form of rivers, which allowed trade of low-value bulk cargo far inland from the sea. This meant that goods could be moved out across the entire Mediterranean drainage basin. The Roman Empire at its height encompassed the entire Mediterranean drainage basin. This meant that the outer borders of the empire secured a vast region that naturally turned inward towards the internal sea. The Romans did also call the Mediterranean Mare Internum, the inner sea, or Mare Nostrum, our sea, during the imperial period. A great achievement of the Romans was that they secured the Mediterranean so well that even very low value cargo could be traded across the empire, making the same goods available more or less everywhere. Grain from Egypt and North Africa could feed Rome very cheaply, making it possible for it to reach a population in excess of 1 million in an area that could not support so many people. Just as impressive, Roman concrete, which depended on volcanic ash from Italy, could be supplied across the empire affordably enough that it was used everywhere. This could only really be done by sea, with short legs of the journey crossing over land, especially to parts of the empire outside the Mediterranean drainage basin. This also necessitated a system of feeder ships going up and down rivers and difficult to navigate water. For the smallest river and difficult waters, small naves actuariae, which both use sail and oars, were used. The fact that they were rowed made it possible for them to better go against the wind and current. For more open waters, naves onerariae, which only used sails, were used. They had much higher freeboard, making rowing impossible. If caught in a difficult spot, they could use warping with a catching anchor to pull the ship in the desired direction. This would also be the manner in which they entered port, as they did not carry rowboats to drag the ship. They had significantly higher cargo capacity than naves actuariae and thus could cost-effectively sail cargo much longer. For very low-value cargo at great distances, the huge corpitaic grain ships would be used in great numbers. It is an interesting detail about Roman maritime technology that as the empire grew, so too did the size of the merchant ships. The ships of the Roman fleet, contrary, reached a maximum size in the shape of the triremes, quadriremes, and quinquiremes of the late Republic. As early as the Battle of Actium in 31 BC between Octavian's fleet of 400 smaller Liburna biremes and Mark Antony's fleet of 500 larger ships, it was the smaller, much more nimble Liburnas that won the day. Thus would be ushered in the imperial principate from 27 BC, during which time the Roman fleet would consist of smaller Liburnas for patrolling. This did make sense, as after the takeover of Egypt, Rome would no longer face any major naval powers in the Mediterranean. And this is a very important point. Roman sea trade during the imperial period would overwhelmingly be internal trade, that is, the Roman provinces trading between themselves and not just luxuries but vast amounts of base goods. This is where the Roman Empire really shines in its ability to make goods equally available across the empire. And in this regard, the Mediterranean played a pivotal role. The significant internal maritime trade of the Roman Empire also sets it apart from the other large cultural regions of Eurasian antiquity. India and China were both large continental realms centered around rivers rather than the sea, thus making the sea predominantly of use for external trade. For internal trade, India and China had their large inland river systems. China even went so far as to connect the Yellow River and Yangtze with the Grand Canal. This canal was a project of staggering size and shows the importance of waterways for trade and transport. The canal is in use to this day. The Parthians in Iran were the nearest large and powerful state to the Romans, and although they usually controlled Mesopotamia, they were a steppe empire relying heavily on overland transport. Indeed, for the Romans to reach Mesopotamia's core region, they would need to travel far inland from the Mediterranean. This probably added to the difficulty in holding these lands, with rivers running away from the Mediterranean. The only large cultural region with large internal seafaring would be the Austronesian Malay and the Southeast Asian archipelago, but they were less unified and did not encompass the sea, but were islands and peninsulas in between the Indian and Pacific Ocean. So the Romans had a sea trade advantage in the enclosed nature of the Mediterranean, and the fact that they managed to subjugate the entire coastline, removing threats. This created perfect conditions for large-scale transport of base goods, as safety also means low costs. And safety also means less crew needed for protection, and less crew means less wages and provisions and more room for cargo. You also do not need to worry about escaping threats, so the ships could be bulky for more cargo. The Romans held complete control over the Mediterranean from the conquest of Egypt in 30 BC until the rise of the Vandal kingdom in 439 AD. And even after losing much of the coastline around the Mediterranean, the Romans would remain if not the dominant naval power far into the Middle Ages, with the Eastern Roman capital of Constantinople surviving many sieges due to being supplied from the sea. This naval supremacy also allowed for connection to be maintained to areas that were cut off over land. It was not only internal trade that was done by sea. In the Black Sea, the Romans inherited the trade links with the region, which had delivered much of the grain needs of Athens and which would supply Constantinople after the loss of Egypt. Indeed, the Romans inherited much sea trades from the Greeks and the amphora as a transport container. In Egypt, they maintained and expanded the maritime trade connections with India through the Red Sea and then the monsoon route across the Arabian Sea. The Indo-Roman trade would be conducted with medium-small corpitae from the Roman side and dhows from the Indian. Like later European nations in the Middle Ages and in the Age of Sail, the Romans lacked goods to efficiently trade in the East, so this trade caused a permanent outflow of valuable metals, leading to a permanent need to find more. Despite this, sea transport was a major boon for the empire, securing its smooth functioning by transporting the goods that were too cumbersome for the otherwise excellent Roman road network.